The first thing you need to understand about my fiancée Tess is that she never introduced me as her future husband. Always, my friend Callum, or sometimes, when she was feeling generous, Callum, who I live with. 3 years together, 18 months engaged, and I was still getting the emotional equivalent of a participation trophy. I'm Callum Torvin, 34, software architect for a mid-sized tech firm in Boston. I design systems that think faster than most people, which probably explains why I noticed the patterns in Tess's behavior long before she realized I was watching. My job taught me that every system has vulnerabilities, and every user leaves traces of what they're really doing. Tess Brennan, soon to be Tess Torvin, according to the wedding invitations gathering dust in our spare bedroom, works as a social media manager for Pinnacle Digital. She's 31, blonde in that expensive way that requires monthly maintenance, and blessed with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been truly challenged. Her Instagram has 47,000 followers who hang on her every carefully curated post about authentic living and finding your truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. Our condo sits in Back Bay, one of those converted brownstones where the original molding costs more than most people's cars. Tess picked it out naturally. She has opinions about everything from thread count to the proper way to arrange throw pillows, and she shares these opinions with the enthusiasm of a missionary spreading the gospel. This particular Tuesday morning started like most others, with Tess positioned strategically near our floor-to-ceiling windows, phone in hand, capturing her spontaneous breakfast moment for her audience. She'd been at it for 20 minutes, adjusting the lighting and her expression until she achieved the perfect balance of effortless beauty and relatability. "Callum, could you move? You're creating a shadow," she said, without looking up from her phone screen. I shifted away from the kitchen island where I'd been drinking my coffee and reading the news. This was our dance. She performed. I provided space for the performance. Somewhere along the way, I'd become a supporting character in my own life. "There's a work thing tonight," I mentioned, testing the waters. "Tech mixer at the Prudential Center. Thought we could go together." Tess finally looked up, and I caught something flickering across her face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Can't. Blair's having people over for drinks. Important networking opportunity. Blair Hutchins was Tess's closest friend, a publicist who treated gossip like currency and spent it liberally. She had the kind of sharp features that photographed well and the kind of sharp tongue that cut deep when she wanted it to. Blair knew everyone worth knowing in Boston's social media circles, which made her invaluable to Tess's career aspirations. "Right," I said. "The important networking." Tess missed the edge in my voice entirely. She was back to her phone, probably editing the caption that would accompany her breakfast photo. Something about gratitude and morning light and living authentically. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you tremendous freedom to observe. People say things around you they'd never say to someone they considered a real threat. They leave their phones unlocked, their laptops open, their conversations unguarded. They forget you're even there. I'd been there for all of it. The late nights when Tess claimed to be working on campaigns but came home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. The sudden interest in yoga classes that never seemed to improve her flexibility but certainly improved her mood. The way she'd started talking about Mason Kessler, her boss at Pinnacle Digital, with a frequency that felt less professional and more personal. Mason Kessler, 36 years old, drives a custom Porsche 911 with personalized plates that read "Disrupt" and has never met a mirror he didn't like. He's the kind of guy who uses words like synergy and paradigm shift in casual conversation and somehow makes them sound profound. His LinkedIn profile describes him as a digital innovation evangelist and thought leader in authentic brand storytelling. The first time Tess brought him up, she mentioned his brilliant insights about social media engagement. The second time, it was his incredible vision for the company's future. By the 20th time, She was quoting his opinions on everything from coffee to city planning, like he was some kind of oracle. I'm a software architect. I recognize patterns. That Tuesday evening, while Tess was at Blair's important networking opportunity, I decided to do a little networking of my own. Not the kind that happens at bars with overpriced cocktails and business card exchanges, but the kind that happens when you know how to navigate digital footprints. Tess had always been careless with her passwords. She used the same one for everything. Our anniversary date, plus her mother's maiden name. It took me about 30 seconds to access her cloud storage and another 5 minutes to find what I was looking for. Photos. Dozens of them, taken over the past 4 months. Tess and Mason at restaurants I'd never heard of, sharing desserts and intimate conversations. Tess and Mason at some kind of weekend retreat, both of them looking relaxed and happy in a way that made my chest tighten. Tess and Mason in what appeared to be his apartment, based on the distinctive exposed brick wall I'd seen in his Instagram stories. The timestamps told the story. Dates when Tess claimed to be working late, attending client dinners, or visiting her sister in Providence. A carefully constructed alternate reality where she was living a completely different life with a completely different person. I sat in our living room, surrounded by throw pillows arranged according to Tess's exacting standards, and felt something cold and calculating settle into place where my trust used to be. This wasn't just cheating. It was systematic deception, planned and executed with the same attention to detail Tess brought to her social media campaigns. The smart thing would have been to confront her immediately, pack my things, find a lawyer, start the process of untangling our shared life, cut my losses and move on with whatever dignity I could salvage. But I'm not just smart, I'm thorough. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything, screenshots, timestamps, metadata analysis. I cross-referenced the photos with Tess's social media posts, her calendar, her credit card statements that I had access to through our joint account. The pattern was even more extensive than I'd initially realized. Every girls' night for the past 4 months had been a cover story. Every work emergency that kept her out late had been a date with Mason. Every weekend visit to her sister had been a romantic getaway to places like the Berkshires and Cape Cod. By the time Tess came home at midnight, smelling like wine and Mason's cologne, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier of her double life. She found me in the living room, still dressed in my work clothes, laptop open on the coffee table. "You're up late," she said, kicking off her heels and heading toward the bedroom. "How was your tech thing?" "Enlightening," I replied. She paused in the doorway, something in my tone finally penetrating her post-wine haze. "Everything okay?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing the face of someone I'd planned to marry. The woman I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago had been spontaneous and genuine, quick to laugh and slow to judge. This version was polished and calculating, every gesture measured for maximum effect. "Perfect," I said, "just working on a new project." "Don't stay up too much longer," she said, and disappeared into the bedroom. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I listened to her moving around, going through her nighttime routine, probably texting Mason about how her evening went. After a while, I heard the soft sounds of sleep, and I knew I was alone with my thoughts and my evidence and my slowly forming plan. Because here's the thing about being a software architect. When you find a vulnerability in a system, you don't just patch it. You figure out how extensive the damage is, what other parts of the system might be compromised, and how to prevent it from happening again. Tess had built her deception like a badly designed program, full of security holes and sloppy code. She'd assumed I was too trusting or too stupid to notice the inconsistencies. She'd underestimated my ability to trace her digital footprints and piece together her real activities. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was thinking she could keep playing both sides indefinitely, maintaining her engagement to me while pursuing her relationship with Mason. She wanted the security I provided, the shared apartment, the steady income, the respectable boyfriend she could bring to family events, while enjoying the excitement and status that came with dating her boss. Her third mistake was not realizing that I'd been documenting everything from the moment I became suspicious. I closed my laptop and headed to bed, where Tess was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about her authentic life with Mason. Tomorrow I would start implementing my own project. Not revenge, exactly. That was too emotional, too impulsive. This would be something more systematic and thorough, a comprehensive system redesign. Wednesday morning brought the usual performance. Tess positioned herself by the windows, phone ready, preparing to document another moment of authentic living for her followers. Today's theme appeared to be midweek motivation, complete with a carefully arranged breakfast scene and inspirational caption about embracing challenges. "Morning, beautiful," I said, kissing her cheek as I passed by with my coffee. She smiled without looking away from her phone screen. "Morning. Can you grab me that book from the counter? The one about mindful living. I want to include it in the shot." I handed her the book, a pristine copy she'd never actually read, and watched her arrange it artfully next to her untouched avocado toast. Everything in Tess's world was a prop, carefully selected to support whatever narrative she was selling. "I was thinking," I said casually, "maybe we should have dinner with your parents this weekend. It's been a while since we've seen them." Tess's hand paused for just a moment before resuming her phone positioning. "This weekend's not great. I've got that campaign launch for Mason's new client. Probably be working all weekend." "Mason's new client?" "Of course." "No problem. Maybe next week." I left for work with a kiss and a promise to pick up groceries on my way home. Just another normal Wednesday in our carefully constructed life together. At the office, I had a different kind of work to do. My official job involved designing database architectures and optimizing server performance, but today I was working on a more personal project. I'd spent the previous night thinking about Tess's vulnerabilities, not just the obvious ones I'd already discovered, but the deeper structural weaknesses in the life she'd built. Tess's entire identity was built around her image. Her career, her social status, her self-worth, everything depended on maintaining the carefully curated persona she'd created. She was a brand, and like any brand, she was only as strong as her reputation. The first phase of my project was information gathering. I already had the photos and timeline of her affair with Mason, but I needed to understand the full scope of her deceptions. How many people knew about her relationship with Mason? What lies had she told to cover her tracks? What other vulnerabilities existed in her social and professional networks? I started with social media, using tools I'd developed for work to analyze patterns in Tess's online activity. Cross-referencing her posts with location data, timestamp analysis, and metadata examination revealed even more inconsistencies than I'd initially found. She'd been living a double life for longer than 4 months, more like 8 or 9. Next, I examined her credit card statements more carefully. Our joint account showed her official expenses, but I knew she had personal cards I didn't have access to. However, I could see the payments she made to those cards from our shared checking account, and the amounts had been increasing steadily over the past year. Someone was funding an expensive lifestyle that went far beyond her salary at Pinnacle Digital. By lunch, I had a clearer picture of Tess's situation. She wasn't just cheating with Mason, she was essentially living 2 separate lives, with 2 separate financial structures, 2 separate social circles, and 2 separate sets of commitments. The complexity of her deception was actually impressive, in a sociopathic kind of way. That afternoon, I decided to test a theory. I called Tess around 3 o'clock, knowing she'd be in the middle of her workday. "Hey, babe," I said when she answered. "Quick question. Did you ever return that necklace you bought last month? The one from Tiffany's?" There was a pause. "Which necklace?" "The one you showed me the receipt for. Said you bought it for your sister's birthday, but then decided it wasn't right for her. Another pause, longer this time. Oh, that one. Yes, I returned it. Great. I'm balancing our accounts and wanted to make sure the credit showed up. What day did you return it? Let me think. It was last week sometime. Tuesday, maybe? Perfect, thanks. I hung up and opened my laptop. The necklace receipt was still in her photos, a $200 piece from Tiffany's that she'd purchased 6 weeks ago. But there was no record of any return in our bank statements, and I'd never seen her wear it, which meant either she'd returned it and kept the money elsewhere, or she'd given it to someone else. Given the timeline, I had a pretty good idea who that someone might be. I decided to take a long lunch and do some field research. Pinnacle Digital's offices were in the financial district, about a 20-minute walk from my building. I'd been there a few times for Tess's office parties, so I knew the layout and the usual lunch spots where employees gathered. I found Mason at a trendy sandwich place on State Street, sitting at a corner table with 2 other men I recognized as Pinnacle executives. He was wearing the necklace. Not wearing it exactly. It was hanging from his shirt collar, partially hidden by his jacket, but visible enough that someone looking closely would notice it. A $3,200 necklace that my fiancée had bought with our joint credit card, supposedly for her sister, now decorating her boss and lover. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table where I could observe without being noticed. Mason was holding court, gesturing animatedly while his companions listened with the kind of attention that suggested he was their superior. He had the easy confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged, the kind of swagger that comes from always being the smartest person in the room, or at least thinking you are. He was also wearing a watch I'd never seen before, something expensive and complicated that caught the light when he moved his hands. His shoes looked new, and his suit was definitely upgraded from the last time I'd seen him at one of Tess's office events. I took out my phone and discreetly captured a few photos, making sure to get clear shots of the necklace and watch. Then I finished my coffee and headed back to work, my mind already moving to the next phase of my project. That evening, Tess came home later than usual, claiming she'd been stuck in a client meeting that ran long. She seemed distracted, checking her phone more frequently than normal and responding to texts with the kind of secretive smile that confirmed my suspicions. "How was your day?" she asked, settling onto the couch next to me. "Productive. I've been working on this new project, analyzing user behavior patterns to identify security vulnerabilities. It's fascinating how much you can learn about someone just by examining their digital footprints." Tess looked up from her phone. "Sounds complicated." "Not really. People think they're being careful, but they leave traces everywhere. Social media posts, credit card transactions, location data, communication patterns. If you know how to look, you can reconstruct someone's entire life." She was back to her phone, but I could see the slight tension in her shoulders. The interesting thing is how people rationalize their behavior. They create these elaborate justifications for doing things they know are wrong, and they actually convince themselves that their version of events is the truth. This time, she didn't respond at all, just kept scrolling through whatever was on her screen. But her posture had shifted, and she was holding her phone at an angle that prevented me from seeing what she was looking at. "I was thinking," I continued, "maybe we should start planning the wedding more seriously. Set a date, book a venue, send out save the dates. We've been engaged for 18 months. Tess's fingers stopped moving across her phone screen. "We talked about this. I want to wait until my career is more established. This isn't the right time." "When will be the right time?" "I don't know. Soon. Maybe next year." "Next year?" "Right." She finally looked at me directly, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Guilt, mixed with defiance and something that might have been fear. "Why are you pushing this all of a sudden?" "I'm not pushing anything. I just think it's reasonable to want to marry the person I've been engaged to for a year and a half." "It's not that simple, Callum. There are considerations." "What considerations?" She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. I'm tired. Can we talk about this another time? She headed toward the bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing certainty that Tess was planning to drag out our engagement indefinitely while she figured out whether her future lay with me or with Mason. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, I did some more research. This time, I focused on Mason's social media presence, looking for patterns and connections I might have missed. His Instagram was a carefully curated display of success and sophistication, expensive restaurants, luxury travel, professional achievements, and lifestyle shots that screamed, "Look how successful I am." What I found interesting was the timeline. About 8 months ago, Mason's posts had become noticeably more expensive. Better restaurants, more frequent travel, upgraded everything. His captions had also changed, becoming more philosophical and self-congratulatory, full of phrases about living authentically and embracing transformation. The same phrases Tess had started using in her own posts around the same time. I spent another hour documenting the parallels between their social media activity, creating a comprehensive timeline that showed not just their relationship, but the ways they'd been influencing each other's online personas. They were essentially co-creating a shared narrative about success and authenticity while lying to everyone around them about the nature of their relationship. By the time I finally went to bed, I had enough evidence to end my engagement and probably get Mason fired for violating company policies about relationships between supervisors and subordinates. But that felt too simple, too clean. Tess had spent months carefully constructing her deception, methodically lying to me while planning some kind of future with Mason. She deserved something more comprehensive than a simple breakup. She deserved a systematic dismantling of everything she'd built. Thursday morning, I woke up with the clarity that comes from having a concrete plan. Tess was already in the shower, probably preparing for another day of managing her double life, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to experience some serious system failures. I made coffee and checked my phone, scrolling through the usual morning routine of emails and news. Then I opened a new document and began typing. The first email went to Charles and Marjorie Brennan, Tess's parents. They lived in a sprawling colonial in Wellesley, the kind of old money establishment where appearances mattered more than happiness and reputation was everything. Charles was a retired investment banker who still wore suits to breakfast, and Marjorie was a former debutante who treated social obligations like military campaigns. They'd always been polite to me, but I could sense their disappointment that their daughter hadn't chosen someone with a more impressive pedigree. I was stable and reliable, but I wasn't exciting. I didn't come from money or move in the right circles or have the kind of connections that opened doors. What I did have was documentation. "Dear Charles and Marjorie," I wrote, "I hope this email finds you well. I wanted to reach out because I've discovered some information about Tess that I believe you should be aware of, particularly given your family's commitment to honesty and integrity. I would very much like to meet with you this weekend to discuss some concerns I have about Tess's recent behavior and decision-making. I think you'll find what I have to share both illuminating and troubling. Please let me know when would be convenient for you." I attached a single photo, one of the more innocent ones of Tess and Mason together, taken at what appeared to be an expensive restaurant. Nothing scandalous, just intimate enough to raise questions. The second email went to Blair Hutchins. If Tess's parents were the foundation of her social structure, Blair was the central nervous system of her social network. Blair knew everyone, talked to everyone, and had opinions about everyone. She was also fiercely competitive and had never quite forgiven Tess for landing a job at Pinnacle Digital when Blair's own agency had been passed over for the same account. "Hi, Blair," I wrote. "I hope you're well. I wanted to reach out because I've stumbled across some information that I think you'd find interesting, particularly given your friendship with Tess and your professional connections in the industry. Would you be available for coffee sometime this week? I have some photos and documentation that I think you'd want to see, especially regarding Tessa's relationship with her boss at Pinnacle Digital. I value your discretion, but I also think you deserve to know what's really been going on. I attached a different photo, this one showing Mason wearing the necklace Tess had supposedly bought for her sister. The third email was more delicate. It went to Jennifer Walsh, the HR director at Pinnacle Digital. I'd met Jennifer at several of Tess's office functions, and she'd always struck me as someone who took company policies seriously. Dear Jennifer, I wrote, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to bring to your attention a situation that may be relevant to company policy regarding relationships between supervisors and subordinates. I have reason to believe that Mason Kessler and Tess Brennan have been engaged in a romantic relationship for several months, which I understand may violate Pinnacle Digital's workplace conduct guidelines. I'm happy to provide documentation if needed, but wanted to make you aware of the situation. I understand this is a delicate matter and appreciate your discretion in handling it. I didn't attach any photos to this one yet, but I made it clear that I had them. By the time Tess emerged from the bathroom, I'd sent all 3 emails and was calmly reading the news on my phone. You're up early, she said, toweling her hair. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about our conversation last night. She paused in her hair routine. What about it? The wedding planning. You're right that timing is important. I think we should be more intentional about when and how we move forward. Relief flickered across her face. I'm glad you understand. Absolutely. In fact, I think we should take some time to really evaluate where we both are in our lives, what we want, and whether we're on the same page about our future together. Now she looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we should take a step back and be honest with ourselves about whether we're really right for each other, whether we want the same things, whether we're both fully committed to this relationship. Tess set down her towel and stared at me. Are you breaking up with me? I'm suggesting we have an honest conversation about what we both want. When was the last time we talked about our actual feelings instead of just going through the motions? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For a moment, I saw something like panic in her eyes, quickly replaced by calculation. I think you're overthinking this, she said finally. Every couple goes through rough patches. We just need to communicate better. You're probably right. Maybe we should start by being completely honest with each other about everything. No secrets, no omissions, just complete transparency. The panic was back, more obvious this time. What kind of secrets? Any kind. Work stress, family issues, friendships that might be complicated, anything that might be affecting our relationship. Tess turned back to the mirror and resumed drying her hair, but her movements were more aggressive now. I don't have any secrets, Callum. I've always been honest with you. Good. That's good. I'm glad we can trust each other completely. I finished my coffee and headed to work, leaving Tess to contemplate the implications of complete honesty. By lunch, I'd received responses to all 3 of my emails. Charles Brennan had written back within 2 hours, his message brief and formal. Callum, thank you for reaching out. Marjorie and I would be very interested in meeting with you this Saturday afternoon, if that works with your schedule. Please come to the house around 2 p.m. We appreciate your discretion in this matter. Blair's response was more enthusiastic. OMG, Callum, yes, absolutely, let's meet ASAP. I'm free this afternoon if you want to grab coffee. I had no idea you knew about any of this, but I'm so glad someone else is finally paying attention. Text me. Jennifer Walsh had responded with professional caution. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I would like to schedule a confidential meeting to discuss this matter further. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? Please reply with your availability and contact information. Phase 1 was in motion. I met Blair at a coffee shop in Back Bay, far enough from both our offices to ensure privacy. She arrived 10 minutes early, practically vibrating with anticipation. Okay, spill everything, she said, before I'd even sat down. How long have you known about Tess and Mason? So you knew? Blair rolled her eyes. Honey, everyone knows. Well, everyone except you, apparently. She's been parading him around like a prize for months. The expensive dinners, the weekend trips, the jewelry. Did you really not notice? I noticed the jewelry, especially the necklace she claimed she bought for her sister. The Tiffany's piece? Yeah, Mason's been wearing that to every industry event for weeks. It's actually kind of tacky, but he seems proud of it. Blair pulled out her phone and showed me a series of Instagram stories from various industry events. There was Mason, networking and schmoozing, the necklace clearly visible in every photo. The thing is, Blair continued, Tess has been telling everyone that you two are basically over, that you're just roommates at this point, and she's planning to end the engagement as soon as she figures out the logistics. This was new information. She said that? Multiple times. She's been positioning herself as this brave woman who's finally found true love, but is trapped in a stale relationship with a guy who doesn't understand her ambitions. Blair showed me more photos, screenshots of text conversations where Tess had described me as sweet but limited and not really marriage material. There were detailed complaints about my lack of social connections, my boring job, my failure to appreciate her career goals. She's been building a whole narrative about how Mason is this amazing mentor who's helped her realize her potential, while you're this anchor holding her back from her authentic self. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but it wasn't hurt. It was clarity. Tess hadn't just been cheating on me. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation in her social circle, creating a story that positioned her as the victim and me as the obstacle to her happiness. Here's the thing, though, Blair said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Mason's been doing the same thing in his circles, talking about how he's with this amazing woman who's unfortunately stuck with some loser boyfriend, but they're planning to be together as soon as she can extract herself from the situation. They're both telling the same story. Exactly. Which means they're both planning for you to be out of the picture. The question is when and how. Blair showed me one more screenshot, this one from a group chat that included several people from Tess's industry. The message was from Tess, sent 2 days ago. Things are moving faster than expected. Might be making some big changes sooner than planned. We'll keep you posted, but start thinking about engagement party planning for late summer. I stared at the message, processing the implications. Tess wasn't just planning to leave me, she was planning to replace me. And she was already talking to her friends about engagement parties with Mason. Blair, I said carefully, how would you feel about helping me make sure everyone knows the truth about what's really been going on? Her eyes lit up with malicious delight. What did you have in mind? I spent the next hour showing Blair my documentation, the photos, the timeline, the financial evidence, the social media analysis. Her excitement grew with each revelation. This is incredible, she said finally. You've basically assembled a complete case file. But what are you going to do with it? I'm going to give Tess and Mason exactly what they want, complete transparency about their relationship. I'm just going to make sure everyone else gets to see it too. Blair grinned. I love it, and I know exactly how to make sure the right people see everything. We spent another 30 minutes planning the distribution strategy. Blair had connections throughout Boston's social media and marketing industries, and she knew exactly which people would be most interested in this kind of drama. More importantly, she knew how to package and present information for maximum impact. The key, she explained, is to let people discover the truth themselves rather than just telling them. If you dump everything at once, it looks like revenge. But if you create a trail of breadcrumbs that leads them to their own conclusions, they feel smart and vindicated. And they're more likely to share what they've discovered. Exactly. Plus, Tess has been so condescending to so many people in our industry. There are a lot of folks who would love to see her taken down a peg. By the time we finished our coffee, we had a comprehensive plan for exposing Tess's deception to her entire social and professional network. It was elegant, systematic, and absolutely devastating. Phase 2 was ready to launch. Friday morning brought the first signs that my plan was working. Tess's phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m., and she'd been responding to messages with increasing agitation. Her usual morning routine, the carefully staged breakfast photos, the inspirational captions about authentic living, was abandoned in favor of damage control. "Everything okay?" I asked, pouring my coffee. "Fine," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Just some work drama." I nodded sympathetically and headed to my laptop to check my own messages. Charles Brennan had sent another email confirming our Saturday meeting and asking if I could arrive an hour earlier than planned. Jennifer Walsh had scheduled our HR meeting for this afternoon, and Blair had sent me a series of screenshots showing the early reactions to the information she'd begun circulating. The beauty of Blair's approach was its subtlety. Instead of broadcasting Tess's affair directly, she'd started asking innocent questions in industry group chats and social media comments. "Hey, did anyone else notice Mason wearing that gorgeous necklace at the Innovation Summit? I wonder where he got it." Followed by, "Doesn't Tess have one exactly like it? What a coincidence." The responses had been swift and telling. People started sharing their own observations, sightings of Tess and Mason together, inconsistencies in their stories, suspicious behavior at industry events. Within 12 hours, what had been private speculation among a few insiders was becoming public discussion among dozens of people in their professional circle. My phone rang around 10 a.m. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Callum? This is David Chen from Pinnacle Digital. I'm Mason's boss." David Chen was the CEO of Pinnacle Digital, a serious man in his 50s who'd built the company from a small startup into one of Boston's most successful digital marketing firms. I'd met him briefly at office parties, but we'd never had a direct conversation. "Hi, David. What can I do for you?" "I was hoping we could meet for lunch today. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you, and I think it would be better to do it in person." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Let's talk when we meet. How about the Union Club at noon?" The Union Club was old Boston money, the kind of place where deals were made over handshakes and reputations were built or destroyed over lunch. David suggesting we meet there meant this conversation was going to be serious. I spent the rest of the morning preparing for two crucial meetings, lunch with David Chen and my afternoon session with Jennifer Walsh. I organized my documentation into clear, chronological presentations and prepared copies of the most relevant evidence. The Union Club was exactly what I expected: dark wood, leather chairs, and an atmosphere of quiet authority. David was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table that provided privacy for sensitive conversations. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I'll get straight to the point. I've received some concerning information about Mason Kessler and your fiancée, and I wanted to hear your perspective before I take any action." "What kind of information?" "The kind that suggests Mason has been violating company policy regarding relationships with subordinates, and doing it in a way that reflects poorly on Pinnacle Digital's reputation." David pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photos that I recognized. They were some of the same images I'd provided to Blair, but they'd clearly made their way through industry channels to reach Pinnacle's leadership. "These photos have been circulating among our clients and competitors for the past 24 hours. People are asking questions about Mason's judgment and professionalism. They're also asking questions about whether Pinnacle Digital maintains appropriate workplace standards." I chose my words carefully. "I can understand why that would be concerning. Callum, I'm going to be direct with you. I know this situation must be personally difficult, but I need to understand the full scope of what's been going on. How long have you been aware of the relationship between Mason and Tess?" I told him the truth about discovering the photos, about the timeline of deception, about the financial evidence I'd uncovered. I showed him my documentation, explaining how I'd pieced together the extent of their affair and the ways they'd been using company resources and time for their personal relationship. David listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting to see specific pieces of evidence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This is worse than I thought," he said finally. Mason hasn't just been having an affair with a subordinate, he's been flaunting it publicly while lying to me about the nature of their relationship. And the financial irregularities you've documented suggest he may have been using his company credit card for personal expenses related to this relationship. What are you going to do? I'm going to conduct a thorough investigation starting this afternoon. Mason will be suspended pending the outcome, and depending on what we find, he'll likely be terminated. As for Tess, her employment will be reviewed as well. David paused, studying my face. I have to ask, are you planning to take any legal action, either against Mason, Tess, or the company? I haven't decided yet. Right now, I'm focused on understanding what happened and making sure the truth comes out. I appreciate your restraint, and I want you to know that if you do decide to pursue legal action, Pinnacle Digital will cooperate fully with any investigation. We finished lunch with David explaining the company's investigation process and timeline. By the time I left the Union Club, I knew that Mason's career at Pinnacle Digital was effectively over, and Tess's position was in serious jeopardy. The meeting with Jennifer Walsh was shorter but equally productive. She'd already begun her own investigation based on my initial email, and the evidence I provided confirmed her suspicions about policy violations. She also showed me additional evidence that HR had uncovered. Mason had been using his company expense account for dinners and travel that he'd claimed were client-related, but that actually corresponded to his dates with Tess. This is a clear violation of multiple company policies, Jennifer explained. The relationship itself is problematic, given the supervisor-subordinate dynamic, but the financial irregularities and dishonesty make it a termination-level offense. What about Tess? Her situation is more complicated. She's technically the subordinate in this relationship, which gives her some protection under our harassment policies. However, if we can prove that she was aware of and participated in the financial irregularities, that's grounds for termination as well. Jennifer asked me to provide a formal statement documenting everything I knew about the relationship and its timeline. She also requested copies of all my evidence for the company's internal investigation. By the time I left Pinnacle Digital's offices, I knew that both Mason and Tess would be facing serious professional consequences within the next few days. But I wasn't done yet. I spent Friday evening preparing for my Saturday meeting with Tess's parents. Charles and Marjorie Brennan represented the foundation of Tess's social and financial security. They'd been funding her lifestyle through a trust fund that supplemented her salary, and their approval was crucial to her sense of identity and status. They also valued reputation above almost everything else. I organized my evidence into a presentation that would be clear and compelling without being sensational. I focused on the timeline of deception, the financial evidence, and the impact on both families' reputations. I prepared copies of the most relevant photos and documentation, arranged in chronological order to tell a clear story. That evening, Tess came home later than usual, looking stressed and distracted. Her phone had been buzzing constantly, and she'd been taking calls in the hallway where I couldn't hear the conversations. "Rough day?" I asked. "You could say that. Some issues at work that need to be sorted out." "Anything I can help with?" She looked at me sharply, as if trying to determine whether my offer was genuine or if I knew more than I was letting on. "No, it's just internal company stuff. Nothing interesting." "Well, if you need to talk about anything, I'm here." "Thanks." She disappeared into the bedroom, and I heard her making phone calls late into the night. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent and increasingly frustrated. Saturday morning, Tess announced that she needed to spend the day dealing with work emergencies. "Crisis management," she explained. "Some client issues that came up yesterday. I'll probably be out most of the day." "No problem. I have some errands to run anyway." "What kind of errands?" "Nothing exciting, just some personal stuff I need to take care of." I left the house at 1:30, giving myself plenty of time to drive to Wellesley and prepare for what I expected to be a very interesting conversation with Tess's parents. The Brennan house was exactly as I remembered it, imposing, perfectly maintained, and designed to communicate wealth and status. Charles answered the door wearing a suit despite it being Saturday afternoon, and Marjorie was dressed as if she were hosting a formal tea party. "Callum," Charles said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. Please come in." They led me to their living room, a formal space filled with antique furniture and family portraits that traced the Brennan lineage back several generations. Marjorie poured tea from an elaborate silver service, while Charles settled into his chair with the bearing of a man preparing for serious business. "Now then," Charles said, "your email mentioned some concerns about Tess's recent behavior. We'd very much like to understand what you've discovered." I spent the next hour walking them through my evidence. I started with the timeline of deception, showing them how Tess had been systematically lying about her activities for months. I showed them the photos of her relationship with Mason, the financial evidence of her secret spending, and the documentation of how she'd been portraying our relationship to her friends and colleagues. Charles and Marjorie listened in increasingly horrified silence. When I showed them the screenshots of Tess describing me as not really marriage material and discussing her plans for an engagement party with Mason, Marjorie actually gasped. "I can't believe this," Marjorie said finally. "This isn't the daughter we raised." "The financial irregularities are particularly troubling," Charles added. "If she's been funding this lifestyle with money from her trust fund while lying to us about her circumstances, that represents a serious breach of the terms we established." "What kind of terms?" I asked. "The trust fund was set up to support her career development and provide financial stability while she established herself professionally. It was never intended to fund an affair or support deceptive behavior." Charles and Marjorie exchanged a look that communicated volumes. "Callum," Marjorie said carefully, "we owe you an apology. We've been concerned about some changes in Tess's behavior recently, but we attributed them to career stress. We had no idea she was conducting herself in such a dishonest manner." "What kind of changes?" "She's been more secretive, more demanding financially, and frankly more arrogant in her interactions with us. She's also been making comments about you that we found troubling. Nothing specific, but implications that you weren't meeting her expectations." "We assumed she was going through a difficult period and would work through it," Charles added. "We had no idea she was actively deceiving you and planning to end your engagement." We spent another 30 minutes discussing the implications of what I'd revealed. Charles and Marjorie were clearly devastated by their daughter's behavior, but they were also angry about the potential damage to their family's reputation. "What do you plan to do with this information?" Charles asked. "I'm still deciding, but I think Tess needs to face the consequences of her choices, and I think the people who care about her, including both of you, deserve to know the truth about what's been happening." "We agree completely," Marjorie said, "and we want you to know that regardless of what happens between you and Tess, we consider you to be a person of integrity who deserves much better treatment than you've received." As I prepared to leave, Charles made one final comment that confirmed my suspicions about Tess's motivations. "Callum, I want you to know that we've been planning to make some changes to Tess's trust fund arrangement. We've been concerned about her spending patterns and her attitude toward money. After what you've shown us today, those changes will be implemented immediately." "What kind of changes?" "The trust fund will be suspended pending a complete review of how the money has been used. If we find evidence that it's been used to support deceptive or unethical behavior, the fund may be terminated entirely." I drove home knowing that Tess's financial foundation was about to collapse, just as her professional and social foundations were crumbling. Phase 3 of my plan was complete. Now it was time for the final confrontation. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes Boston feel like the center of the universe. I woke early, made coffee, and sat by our floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city come alive. Tess was still sleeping, probably exhausted from whatever crisis management she'd been attempting all weekend. My phone had been buzzing since dawn with updates from Blair, who'd been monitoring the fallout from our carefully orchestrated information campaign. The story of Tess and Mason's affair had spread throughout Boston's digital marketing community like a virus, mutating and growing more detailed with each retelling. OMG. Blair's latest text read, Mason tried to show up at the Innovation Awards last night and got basically frozen out by everyone. Someone said he left after 20 minutes. And 3 different people have asked me if it's true that Tess has been using company resources for personal trips. I scrolled through the screenshots Blair had been sending me throughout the weekend. The industry group chats were brutal. People were sharing stories about Tess's arrogance, Mason's inappropriate behavior, and their general displeasure at being lied to by 2 people they'd considered colleagues and friends. More importantly, the story had reached the clients and partners that mattered to both Pinnacle Digital and the broader industry. Several companies had posted cryptic social media messages about integrity in professional relationships and the importance of authentic leadership. The subtext was clear. Tess and Mason had become toxic to their professional community. Around 9 a.m., Tess finally emerged from the bedroom, looking like she'd aged 5 years over the weekend. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her skin looked pale and stressed, and her eyes had the kind of hollow look that comes from not sleeping well. "Morning," I said cheerfully. "Coffee's fresh." She poured herself a cup with shaking hands and sat across from me at our kitchen island. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Callum," she said finally, "we need to talk." "Sure, what's on your mind?" I think someone's been spreading rumors about me at work. Malicious gossip that's affecting my professional reputation." I set down my coffee cup and looked at her with what I hoped was appropriate concern. "What kind of rumors?" "Lies about me having an inappropriate relationship with Mason. Someone's been sharing photos that make it look like we're involved." "That's terrible. Do you have any idea who might be doing something like that?" Tess studied my face carefully, looking for any sign that I knew more than I was admitting. "I have some suspicions, but the important thing is that none of it is true." "Of course not. Mason and I have a professional relationship. We've had some client dinners and work meetings, but anything beyond that is just malicious interpretation by people who want to damage my career." I nodded sympathetically. "That makes sense. People can be really vindictive in competitive industries." "Exactly. And I think we should consider whether Boston is the right place for us long term. Maybe we should think about moving somewhere with better opportunities. New York, maybe, or Los Angeles." This was interesting. Tess was proposing that we flee Boston together, presumably abandoning her relationship with Mason and starting over somewhere else. It was a desperate play, but also a revealing one. She was more concerned about salvaging her lifestyle and financial security than she was about her actual feelings for either Mason or me. "That's a big decision," I said. "What about your job at Pinnacle Digital?" "I'm not sure that's working out anyway. There are some personality conflicts that might be difficult to resolve." "Personality conflicts with Mason?" She hesitated just long enough to confirm that she knew her situation at Pinnacle was hopeless. "Among others. I just think a fresh start might be good for both of us." "What does Mason think about you leaving Boston?" The question hit its target. Tess's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally resignation. "Why would Mason's opinion matter?" "I just thought you might want to discuss it with him, given how much you value his professional advice." We stared at each other across the kitchen island, and I could see her trying to figure out exactly how much I knew and how much I was guessing. "Callum," she said carefully, "what exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm not trying to say anything. I'm saying it directly." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd organized all my evidence. I set the phone on the counter between us, displaying the first photo, Tess and Mason at an intimate dinner, clearly more than colleagues. Tess looked at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. Her face went through another series of expressions before settling on something that looked like relief mixed with defiance. How long have you known? About 8 months. I've been documenting everything. I swiped through the photos, showing her the timeline I'd constructed. Her weekend trips with Mason, their romantic dinners, the expensive gifts, the social media evidence, the financial documentation. You've been tracking me like some kind of stalker. I've been protecting myself from someone who's been systematically lying to me while planning to destroy my reputation and steal 8 months of my life. I showed her the screenshots of her conversations with Blair and other friends, the messages where she'd described me as not marriage material and discussed her plans for an engagement party with Mason. Those conversations were private. So was our relationship, supposedly, but you've been sharing details about our private life with everyone you know while lying to me about your feelings and your intentions. Tess stood up and began pacing around the kitchen, her mind clearly racing through options and scenarios. Okay, fine. Yes, Mason and I have been seeing each other, but it's not what you think. What do I think? You think this is some calculated betrayal, but it's not. It just happened. Mason and I connected professionally, and that connection grew into something deeper. I didn't plan for it to happen. You didn't plan to spend 8 months lying to me about where you were going and what you were doing. You didn't plan to use our joint credit card to buy expensive gifts for your lover. You didn't plan to tell all your friends that our relationship was over while continuing to live with me and accept my financial support. It's complicated. It's really not. You wanted to keep me as a backup plan while you figured out whether Mason was going to commit to you long term. You wanted the security I provided while enjoying the excitement he offered. Tess stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. And what if I did? What if I wanted to make sure I was making the right choice before I upended my entire life? Then you should have been honest about it instead of lying to everyone involved. You wouldn't have understood. Try me. For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But then her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, pure calculation, without any pretense of affection or remorse. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. You're a nice guy, Callum, but you're not enough. You're not ambitious enough, not connected enough, not exciting enough. Mason offers me opportunities you never could. He understands my career goals and has the influence to help me achieve them. And the fact that he's married? This stopped her cold. What? I pulled up another photo on my phone, a screenshot from Mason's Facebook page that I'd found buried in his privacy settings. It showed Mason with a woman and 2 young children, tagged as family vacation, and dated just 6 weeks ago. Mason Kessler has been married for 12 years. His wife Jennifer lives in Connecticut with their 8-year-old twins, while Mason maintains an apartment in Boston for work. You're not his girlfriend, Tess. You're his Boston mistress. The color drained from Tess's face as she stared at the photo. That's not possible. He told me he was divorced. He lied to you the same way you lied to me, the same way you've both been lying to everyone else. I showed her more evidence. Social media posts from Mason's wife, school photos of his children, property records showing the family home in Connecticut that he still co-owned. He's been playing the same game you have, keeping multiple relationships active while lying to everyone about his true situation. The difference is that he's better at it than you are. Tess sank back into her chair, staring at the evidence of Mason's deception. I could see her mind working through the implications, not just the personal betrayal but the professional and social consequences of being involved with a married man who'd been lying about his status. This changes everything, she said quietly. It changes nothing. You still made the choices you made. You still lied to me for 8 months. You still used our relationship as cover while you pursued someone else. The fact that he was lying to you too doesn't excuse your behavior. What do you want from me? I want you to face the consequences of your actions. I told her about my meetings with her parents, with David Chen, with Jennifer Walsh. I explained how her professional reputation had been systematically destroyed over the past week, how her trust fund was being suspended, how Mason was likely to be terminated from Pinnacle Digital. "You've ruined my life," she said. "I've revealed your life. The ruin is entirely your own creation." Tess's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at it, and I saw Mason's name on the screen. "Answer it," I said. "I'd love to hear how he explains the wife and children." She declined the call, but it immediately started ringing again. "He's probably calling to do damage control," I continued, "to coordinate your stories and figure out how to minimize the fallout. But here's the thing. There is no damage control. Everyone knows everything now." The phone stopped ringing, then immediately chimed with a text message. Tess looked at it, and her face went pale. "What does it say?" She handed me the phone. The message was from Mason. "We need to talk immediately. My wife knows about us, and she's threatening to call your parents and your employer. This is a disaster." "Looks like Mason's other life is colliding with his Boston life," I observed. "That's going to be awkward for both of you." Tess stood up abruptly and headed toward the bedroom. "I need to pack some things." "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet, but I can't stay here." "Actually, you can't take anything that belongs to both of us. And since your trust fund is frozen and you're probably about to lose your job, you might want to think carefully about your immediate financial situation." She stopped in the doorway and turned back to me. "You're really going to leave me with nothing?" "I'm not leaving you with anything. You created this situation entirely on your own. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth about what you've been doing." "What about forgiveness? What about working through problems together? What about the 3 years we spent building a life? What about the 8 months you spent systematically destroying that life while lying to my face every single day?" Tess's phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered it, I could hear a woman's voice on the other end, angry, loud, and asking very pointed questions about Tess's relationship with Mason Kessler. Tess hung up quickly, but the phone immediately started ringing again. "That's going to keep happening," I said. "Mason's wife is probably just getting started." Over the next 2 hours, I watched Tess's carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Her phone rang constantly, Mason trying to coordinate damage control, her parents demanding explanations, colleagues asking about the rumors, and Mason's wife calling repeatedly, with increasingly specific and threatening questions. Blair texted me updates throughout the afternoon. Mason's wife showed up at Pinnacle Digital looking for him. Security had to escort her out. Someone posted screenshots of Mason's family photos in the industry group chat. Tess's Instagram is getting destroyed in the comments. By evening, Tess had packed a single suitcase and called a rideshare to take her to a hotel. She stood in our living room, her former living room, looking around at the carefully arranged furniture and throw pillows that had once represented her perfect life. "I hope you're satisfied," she said. "I'm satisfied that the truth came out. I'm satisfied that I won't be wasting any more time on someone who was never honest with me about their feelings or intentions. I'm satisfied that you'll face real consequences for treating people like disposable props in your personal drama. You used to be kinder. You used to be honest. People change." Her rideshare arrived, and I watched from the window as she loaded her suitcase and drove away into the Boston night. My phone buzzed with one final text from Blair. "Mason just posted on LinkedIn that he's taking time to focus on family priorities. Translation, he got fired, and his wife is making him move back to Connecticut." I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room that was now entirely mine, surrounded by throw pillows that I would probably donate to charity tomorrow. Outside, the city continued its Sunday evening rhythm, completely indifferent to the small drama that had just concluded in my corner of Back Bay. 3 years of my life had ended, but they'd ended on my terms, with complete transparency and appropriate consequences for everyone involved. Tess would face the social and professional repercussions of her choices. Mason would face the personal and financial consequences of his deceptions, and I would move forward with the clarity that comes from knowing exactly who someone really is and what they're actually capable of. My phone buzzed with one more message, this one from an unknown number. This is Jennifer Kessler, Mason's wife. I wanted to thank you for helping me understand what my husband has really been doing in Boston. I hope you're doing okay. I typed back, I'm doing fine, thank you. I hope you and your children are as well. We will be. And Callum? You're better off without her. I set down my phone and finished my wine, thinking about systems and vulnerabilities and the satisfying completeness of a well-executed project. Tomorrow, I would start designing